Welcome to Birdsong. I'm your host, Caillou Kiora, and in this episode we have Laura Dawn, also known as Laura D, joining us on the show. So, Laura D, psychedelic advocate, author, and international speaker who has been leading transformational retreats for 10 years. She teaches how to intentionally explore psychedelics and sacred plant medicines within a holistic framework as powerful visionary tools for growth, transformation, and creative manifestation. She is passionate about teaching people how to consciously microdose psychedelics within the framework of a daily morning practice to inspire you to open your creative channels, up-level daily habits, and tap into flow states so that you can create with a deeper purpose. She grew her first online brand to 1.5 million people on Facebook, sold it for 6 figures, wrote 2 published books. She built a volcanic hot spring retreat center from scratch and built a 7-figure retreat business, all using the visionary techniques and practices that she teaches. Her website is livefreelaurad.com, and that's the same as her Instagram handle at livefreelaurad. Now, with this conversation, I hit record sometime after we initially tuned in before the formal part of the episode. And because we were touching on some relevant points of discussion, I thought I'd keep it in there and share it with you guys so we'll just flow naturally into the heart of the conversation. Let's get straight into it. I trust that you will find value in this conversation to carry with you on your own path forward. I don't have the answers, but I'm certainly open to exploring these things with an open mind and an open heart and trying to, and I get this sense from you as well that we're, as the dream weavers, the fire carriers, the change makers, however you want to articulate it, it's all about trying to move towards unification and find shared ground to stand upon rather than that divide and conquer mentality that a lot of people seem to be still steeped in.
Mm-hmm. It's this mentality that I think we're rooted in is like the attack and defend, and I think it comes from a place of being really hurt, and I get that, and people who are hurting like to hurt other people, and so I question, I think a lot of these movements that are happening right now are so important, and I also just keep reminding myself, can we do this from a place of kindness? And maybe not, I don't know. I don't have the answers, but, maybe anger is useful, but I think the way that we channel that anger is really a place of inquiry. And I know that when people come at me from a very angry place, it's hard for me to listen. So I know that, just from my own experience, I know that as soon as people start attacking me, for the color of my skin and the work that I'm doing, it's hard to have a conversation and sit down from that place. And so, it's a tricky dance to dance these days, and especially on social media,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I mean, you can't portray all sides in a 60-word post. So, and from one topic, there are infinite angles to perceive one topic. So, if people want to attack you about pretty much anything, they could, and they can, and they are. And I've been on social media for almost, since the beginning of Facebook. And it's really disheartening to see the progression from then to now and just how much polarization is being fueled online, how much division. And I hold it in my heart and the prayer that there's a better way and that we find a better way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I just had a thought then. I wonder if someone has come up with, an entrepreneur's come up with a course about social media etiquette. Perhaps that's something that we need, like a total framework around how to operate on social media. It seems like one of the fundamental tenets of this is having that understanding that you cannot convey every single perspective within your post. And just because someone posts something, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have not considered the myriad of other perspectives and they don't hold multiple perspectives at once. They're just putting one forward. It's such a big trap.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny that you say that because I have just recently talked to a friend. I won't name her. She's quite a public figure, but she has a huge brand that talks about plant medicines and psychedelics. And she does actually so much to hold conversation around cultural reciprocity. And she has been attacked online like just people who are not actually looking at the bigger picture and just from such a narrow perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And she reached out to me because of what I just went through online. And she said, she went through a very traumatic experience, and she's been taking a course by someone for dealing with social media trauma. And that's how prevalent it is now, that people have to actually, get support and pay for courses to navigate through social media trauma. And I'm just thinking like, wow, we are digressing and regressing and devolving. And and then I was thinking, well, gosh, like I should create a course for like what it takes to be a leader and step out and hold your truth with strength, but softness, and firmness, but kindness, and capacity to hold conversation and deal with, haters, as you said, when we hopped on. And it's, what is hating doing? Like, where are we getting with that? And I think that's a big thing that we can all ask ourselves. Like, if I'm reacting from a triggered place, is that helping or hurting?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a large part of the work that you're already doing. Are you just talking about formulating this into more of a specific framework or course that people can undertake in their own time?
I was thinking about it, and I do one-on-one coaching sessions, and even in the coaching session I had with a client this morning, this was just so prevalent, in just what she's going through as well. And it just makes me recognize how strong someone has to be to just step out in this cultural climate that we're living in today, that is fundamentally built on division and separation. And people can get criticized for anything. Like, it's, and how to navigate that and how to stay true to, okay, I want to listen to the conversation and I want to be aware, like, what are my shadow sides right now? What's mine in this? What's yours in this? Like, what do I want to carry in this conversation? And what do I actually just need to not carry and drop by the wayside as I continue to stay true to my path? And it takes a lot of fortitude to be willing to have that kind of willingness to have discernment, and just to be willing to actually lean in and ask these questions. What is mine? What's not mine here? Like, what harsh opinions and criticism do I want to receive, and what don't I want to receive right now? What's not true for me?
Yeah, that discernment piece, that's a big one that I've spoken to for a long time. And, it's really interesting how we are almost extending our nervous system through the realms of technology. Our nervous system used to be inextricably intertwined with the greater weave of creation and all of the animals, all the plants, the bird songs, everything. But now we've gone in a completely different direction, where our sensory antenna has become attuned to these technological wavelengths at the tip of our fingers and the tap of a keyboard. It's a strange thing. It's a very strange thing. Like, it's natural is certainly not the best word to use, because arguably everything is natural. So I've been ruminating on perhaps what is a better word to use in replacement of natural when we're talking about the path that we want to be reconnecting with. And a word that always comes back to me is just reconnecting back to our animal, fleshly, wild body.
And I think social media is contributing to the division and the polarity. I have a really good friend, David Henry, who he's studying therapy right now, and he's really into different theories. And he talks about co-regulation, like nervous system regulation. And so as humans, we find healing and we get into like rhythmic sync with other humans, right? That's how, even our brain waves sync together. We co-regulate our nervous systems by connecting to human beings. And now with social distancing in place and with people on social media, we're actually evolving or devolving towards co-regulating with electronic devices. And that's a very different frequency. And so I'm curious, what is going to happen to the evolution of humanity with the technology that we're regulating with now, and how it's fragmenting our view of reality, how it's shifting the way that we see and perceive. It's reinforcing a very fragmented view of reality. It's almost impossible to come with a very holistic perspective when you go online or on social media.
Yeah, and then of course it brings up the philosophical discussion then about whether or not we are in fact devolving, or this is part of the evolutionary
Yeah.
path that we're supposed to take, and we are supposed to be the birthers of artificial intelligence and technology, and something
Yeah.
else is, it's just this infinite path of expansion in all kinds of weird and wonderful ways.
Yeah, it was funny. We just talked about that yesterday too. He was
Okay.
like, well, maybe technology, us humans creating technology is, the next evolutionary phase. So it's definitely a lot of inquiry around that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm.
And then we come back
Mm-hmm.
to perhaps one of the fundamental tenets as well, which is that we do have the choice. We do have choice of which direction that we want to go, and
Mm-hmm.
what prerequisites are we taking into account when we are moving
Mm-hmm.
forward with our choices. And at the basis of that for me is health and harmony. And when we look at our path of technology and where that's going, it's certainly not in health and harmony for ourselves or our planet. So I think that kind of clarifies, perhaps brings more clarity to the conversation. Hey, I got you back again.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, I don't know what happened.
Technological
How do you want to
glitch.
do this? Do we want to start again? I know you've been recording.
Yeah.
But hi, thanks for having me on.
Totally. We jumped in the deep end nice and quick there, didn't we?
I know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting because we haven't been connected all that long, and somehow we stumbled upon each other through these technological realms that we've been speaking to, the realms of Instagram. And, I saw some of the epic work that you've been doing, and especially within and around the plant medicine scene, and channeled through the vortex of social media. And I immediately got the vibe that you were a warm and friendly individual doing great things in the world. So I invited you on the show, and now here we are.
Thank you. Yeah, here we
Yeah.
are. And it's nice to be here with you. And yeah, just such a deep resonance when I saw some of the comments that some people were making on your feed and how you chose to respond to. And I was like, yep, this is being a leader of this time. This is what it takes, is, fielding all sorts of criticisms and,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, maybe we can get into that in the more of the heart of our conversation, perhaps for the listeners, because I think there's some potent pieces there for all of us to take on board when we're navigating this weird and wonderful social media climate, as we've been speaking to. But, firstly, I'd love to hear a little bit about your backstory and some of the pivotal moments in your life. But before we get to that, we've already dove super deep into our discussions on technology and navigating those realms. But I like to start these conversations by inviting my guests to answer a similar question, which is all centered around honoring the sacred or remembering the sacred ways. So my invitation to you, Laura D, is to share some words in this regard, whether it be through prayer or intention for our dialogue or for the listeners who are going to be joining us, or any thoughtful words that speak to your relationship with the sacred and what it means for you to remember and relate to this theme.
Thank you so much. That's such a beautiful invitation and such a nice way to start halfway through. I really want to start by just offering a lot of gratitude to this land that I'm on right now and speaking to this earth. What I'm looking out at in front of me is very recent lava flow that's covered the land right in front of me within the last 30 years, and then ocean beyond that. And I'm speaking to you from the big island of Hawaii. And I am grateful for the cultures that have walked this land before me. And in addition to the people who have cultivated sacred ways on this land, I really want to offer my respect to the spirit of this island. Pele, she has taught me so much on this journey. And mostly, especially speaking to this notion of new earth, and through destruction has birthed creation, and that's been such a huge part of the teachings of this land and this island. And when you think about it, this island, it's literally sitting on top of magma that's flowing from the center of the earth up, and that's creating new land. And I've been here for only about a decade, so very small, blip of the grand scheme of time.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time, I've really learned a lot about what it means to work with energy, how to channel energy in our lives, because when there's a lot of energy, even that we're feeling right now on this planet, a lot of upheaval, we can learn how to channel that. And so, amongst just so much poverty in this area, somehow she taught me how to really tap into abundance here. And 2 years ago, after we built our retreat center, we had to evacuate because of the lava flow. There was a major volcanic eruption here, and many of our community dispersed. And so the essence, it's so bittersweet. It's the full polarity of the black and white, full spectrum duality of destruction and creation and energy. And how do we work with that? And I am who I am because of this island and what I've built here and what she has taught me about impermanence. And so really all that to really land on the word impermanence, and that this is sacred because we're here in this moment, because we are alive, we have consciousness, and we are blessed to experience that. And it's so easy to fall into this, so absorbed with the 3D reality and everything that's going on, the social media and blah, blah, blah. And when you zoom out and take a bigger picture perspective, it doesn't matter. It matters significantly, and it also doesn't matter. And so holding so much of the duality as I look, out and see the new earth that's created in front of me, and the destruction that came with that, and the tears that shed because of that, and the new plants now, the seedlings that are coming up, breaking through the hardness of the lava, the black lava, and literally watching it break open and plants starting to grow from that. And I think this is metaphorical in so many ways to speak to what we were just speaking about. Nothing is good or bad. We label it good or bad. Oh, you're doing this wrong. Shame on you. You're doing this right. Good for you. It's like, when times are as divided and polarized as this, we just have to trust our own path and our own wisdom. And we don't know what's good or bad, creation or destruction. We put labels on it because we're trying to concretize our reality, but we're all just floating in a massive void of space. And I don't know what's more sacred than that.
Yeah, beautiful words. When you were speaking about there is no right or wrong or good or bad, I just remembered that during my conversation with one of our previous guests, Willow Jane, we were talking about the Andean notion or concept of sami and hucha, which is light energy, and heavy energy, which is completely different from looking through the lens of good and bad or positive and negative. It's that some energies resonate with us and we consider them to be light energies, and the dense energies, we can park them to the side. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be condemned or demonized, because for someone else, those dense energies might be light energies. So just being able to hold everything and just saying, yeah, this is light, this resonates. Okay, we can understand the polarity that's going to exist, but I can park that to the side. And one of the things that I'm resonating with you through your sharing about the land is that I'm here on Gunditjmara country, which is southwestern Victoria in Australia, and this is volcano country over here as well. We haven't had any volcanoes erupt over here for millions of years, but still having spent quite a considerable amount of time exploring the lava tunnels and the areas that have contained some of that really, really powerful energy has been it's been really, really potent for me, developing a connection with these lands. So when I spoke to you through email or message saying that the lands of Hawaii have been calling me for quite some time, it's because of that resonant volcano energy. So I can imagine how beautiful it is for you over there, seeing that convergence of death and destruction and rebirth through the hot magma and all the rest of it. So you're in Hawaii, but I know that you were recently in Costa Rica. So I would love to hear a little bit more of your if you want to call it your origin story, or perhaps just your journey of where you've been, who you've been, what you've done along the path of becoming who you are today.
Whew, how far back do we want to go? Generations.
Yeah, right.
Well, I was born and raised in Montreal, and so I'm Canadian, and I grew up to two entrepreneurs raised me, and I'm grateful for the family that I grew up in. And you know, that was the bubble that we grow up in, is sort of like the lens from which we are sort of given to perceive the world. And so my parents were very kind people, and also really instilled a very strong sense of philanthropy. You know, they believed in, like, you know, giving 10% of your earnings away. And my entire life, my parents were entrepreneurs, so I never saw them go to jobs or anything like that. My mom went back to school when I was a young child, youngest of 4 kids, and she taught me what it meant to be strong and committed to a vision. And so did my father. My father's a visionary. He would talk about ideas and paint these pictures, and then before I knew it, he was making it happen. And we have other challenges in our, you know, dynamic in our relationship, but I was grateful for this piece, this belief that he planted in me, that whatever you see in your mind, you can create in reality. Everything that you see in this life was first just an idea in someone's head. And I've always sort of beat to my own drum. I've always been that kid who was like, oh, everyone's going left, I want to go right. Like, what's right? You know, what's going, you know, so I was always this kind of person who really was committed to what felt true for me. And even in high school, I didn't really want to go to school. I felt it was such a waste of time. And I felt like, hey, I just want to get a tutor, and I'll do 1 hour of studying to replace a whole week of going to school, because the whole time I was in school, I was like, this is just stupid. People are just yelling at each other. And it's just, you know, it was such a waste of time. And so I've always kind of looked for like efficient ways to do things. And then I ended up going to university and getting a degree in business. And while I was there, I started watching a lot of sort of like alternative conspiracy theory movies, and just, you know, going to school. And I just have a knack with numbers. And I went to finance, and I was investing in the stock market, and I actually did really well. And but I had my first high dose psilocybin experience when I was 15. And that really just opened my reality. And I would look up at the universe. And I also struggled with depression as a teenager. And I really just felt this sense of something is so much bigger than my reality. But of course, you know, you have those experiences, and then you go back in your bubble. And my parents were just very adamant about me going to school. And the only thing I thought I would want to study is entrepreneurship and business. And so I'm in school, and even the whole time I was there, I was in a very small program with 8 other students, and we managed $1 million portfolio. And I was investing my own money in the stock market, and I was doing really well. And I had these companies that were coming to vet me. And, you know, I was like on the fast track to success, you know, financial success. And I was miserable, you know, and I wasn't happy. And I was struggling. I was using other hard drugs, cocaine, lots of alcohol, to just numb out on weekends. And I had just a pretty big meltdown at one point in my life. And I remember being on the bathroom floor, and I had my first like out of body experience where I saw myself, and I thought, actually, this doesn't have to be my life. I don't have to choose this. And so I decided to literally pack a backpack, 70-liter backpack, and I gave away everything that I owned, and I left, and I never went back. And that was in over 15 years ago. And so
where did you go?
It's been one long adventure. Well, I flew out west. So I have an older brother who's 10 years older than me. And when I was around 8 or 9, he was, you know, in his late teens, experimenting with other, I don't want to, you know, incriminate him on here, but he was experimenting with things. And then he would come back and tell me these just fantastical stories about British Columbia and, you know, climbing mountains and canoeing with like giant toads and, just like all these. So I was just like a little kid, at that time. And he was planting seeds about the fungi world and, so to speak. And so I took a flight and I hitchhiked across British Columbia for 3 months and just lived out of my backpack. And one day, this young gentleman picked me up hitchhiking, and we spent a day together, jumping off cliffs in these cold river waters and the hot days of British Columbia. And then I ended up taking a one-way plane ticket to China, traveled all through China, Southeast Asia. And one day I was in Thailand and I bumped into that young gentleman just very randomly, exactly 6 months to the day later. And we fell in love, and I spent about 5 years of my life with him and kept traveling. After I met him, I actually went to Australia. I lived out of a van in Australia for a year, surfing up the coast and, working some odd jobs, but mostly just living. I sold all my stocks at that point. Because I was just feeling like it wasn't ethically aligned for me to be holding those stocks anymore, especially because, I covered the commodities sector, and it's crazy to think about that. But I was young and I didn't really know, it's like you grow up in a whole bubble and you think, oh, this is what, our culture tells us is good. And at that time in my life, post-university, I did a lot of psychedelics. I went really deep, just days at a time on beaches in Southeast Asia with nobody on them, and really just purging my degree, like purging it. It was like this psychic purging on every level. And it was time at a certain point to leave that partnership. It just felt right. And ended up coming to Hawaii about 10 years ago, and I met my future husband. And then we moved here and we bought our first 10 acres of land. And I had a vision from working with ayahuasca that we were going to build a retreat center. And so I just held that vision super strong. And then we bought our first 10 acres of land, and we didn't know when we bought it that we were going to tap into hot water. And so for the first year, we bought that land. We pulled our VW van onto the land. We lived without any water, no power, no electricity, no. And then some miracles happened, some very big miracles happened. And I grew my first online brand to about 1.5 million people on Facebook, spreading positivity around the world. And I had an ayahuasca ceremony, and I prayed for a miracle to happen to support us on the vision of building our retreat center. And the next day, someone reached out to me and said, I want to buy your brand, your online brand, for 6 figures. And it was like within a week, we had a bunch of money to invest in, building our place. And then we ended up tapping into hot water. And so on that land is a well that has 111 degree water with 400 minerals in it. It was just this miracle. And over the years, thousands of people came to our place for healing, for such a deep sense of reconnecting to the land. And we'd watch people crying in the gardens, and that was before I was really, more of a psychedelic advocate. I was in health and wellness. I wrote a book called Unhooked. My focus was working with people with disordered eating and food addiction. And people would come and just have these incredibly just healing experiences, reconnecting to the earth, reconnecting to their food source. And then 2 years ago, the volcano erupted and we evacuated, and the lava, it didn't take our land, thankfully, but someone made us an offer while the lava was flowing like a mile away. And we took that offer. And so it's been, just still grieving the loss and the change and, the loss and the burying of a vision that we were holding on to. And now we live next door. We have 10 acres next door, and I live
Didn't
in
have to move very far. That's great.
Yeah. I live in a 40-foot long bus that's converted into a tiny home. And I've been living off grid for 15 years and growing my own food for many, many years. And growing up in suburbia to, living in this very different lifestyle has really shaped me, into the woman that I am. Building that retreat center with just me and my husband and one other person really shaped me into the woman that I am today. And the capacity to hold a vision and prayer and, ability to follow through and pray for support in all the dimensions to have an idea, transmute from the spirit realm into this 3D reality to bring benefit to other people.
Wow. What a ride through life so far. That's amazing. Yeah. And now
Hmm.
you're in a place where you are, aside from living off grid and
Hmm.
living a wonderful life by the sounds of it, you're in a place where you're working with the change makers and the fire carriers and the entrepreneurs and essentially helping them step into the greatest expression of themselves so they can bring their medicine and their gifts and be in service in a way that's bringing health and
Hmm.
harmony to all our communities and seeding that back into our planet.
Yeah. And, I've been running retreats for 10 years, and that's really even more the direction. That's why I was in Costa Rica. I launched just a wonderful retreat. It was over New Year's, 11 days, 40 people, and working with a lot of these people, the change makers, the entrepreneurs. And now that COVID is happening, I don't think I'm going to be running retreats for a couple of years. And so I've decided to go back to grad school. And so I'm getting a master's degree in science, which the focus is creativity research and change leadership. And I chose this program because I'm able to really focus on designing my own electives. So I'm going to be focusing on the research that focuses on studying the overlap and the intersection between plant medicines and creative problem solving. And so this to me is just really sort of the crux of it. How do we teach each other to think outside the box, to enhance cognitive flexibility, creative thinking, and can we leverage psychedelics and work with sacred plant medicines in a mindful way that helps us shake up that neuronal structure so that we can actually come up with solutions to the greatest challenges that we face. And so that's really the future direction of where I'm going with my work.
Yeah, great. That was going to be my next question. How do the sacred medicines and the psychedelics weave into the work that you're doing? And it seems like I would have to agree that that does seem to be one of the frontiers or the nexus points of consciousness. It's getting the entrepreneurs and the change makers and weaving into these transformational modalities or peak states of consciousness, of course, which psychedelics and sacred medicines help to facilitate, so that we can facilitate these greater changes and look at things from a complex systems point of view, because we're facing a lot of complex problems in our world, and it seems that we need complex solutions to be able to weave everything together and build something new. So I know that you've developed a framework around working with psychedelics, and I know that part of your work is through microdosing and helping people kind of gain an understanding or a languaging of that, experiential languaging that is. So I'm curious to know, or to have you speak about your relationship with this framework that you've developed with microdosing and all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's interesting because there's not a lot of research yet. The research is starting to happen, and I've been actually having some really amazing conversations with neuroscientists who are starting to research microdosing more thoroughly. And now that the ban is being lifted, that's going to start happening a lot more, thankfully. So mostly it's on personal experience. I started microdosing psilocybin about 15 years ago. So I've been working with plant medicines for over 2 decades. And while I was in those teenage years, I just intuitively started microdosing. So it's been quite the long wave form of, cultivating a practice. But the framework is basically learning how can we, it's not like, microdose and then go grocery shopping. It's like, how can we actually bring this into our lives to bring more presence? And within the framework of a morning practice in particular, one that brings more mindfulness and more mind training to be able to hold our center. And meditation and psychedelics have a lot of overlap. And one of the amazing things with microdosing is that because there is just a slight subperceptual shift, it is such a strong support for cultivating a strong meditation practice. And so, yeah, I work with people who are really looking at leveraging microdosing to tap into flow states. There's a huge overlap between microdosing and flow states in terms of like the neurochemistry and how we can leverage that. And I'm working with people who are creating. So teaching people, okay, so for example, we all know, for the people who have like sat in ayahuasca ceremonies or had the psychedelic experiences, there's this afterglow, that window of mental flexibility. So for me, it's more about like, how do we leverage this window? Okay. How do we start to understand like the science of habit? Can we understand our own mind and be able to apply that knowledge at the time that it counts the most, where we're the most mentally malleable, the most cognitively flexible? So it's really just getting people to pay attention, focus their awareness in ways so that the change that we hope and wish and desire to see in our lives actually really transmutes and becomes really deeply entrenched and rooted into the fabric of our everyday lives. Because you can be sitting in ceremony and think to yourself, I really want to be nicer to my partner. But in that moment where you're triggered in that dynamic, you actually have to choose. You have to make the choice to be kinder, to say the nicer, or de-escalate the conversation. So it's all about showing up in the 99.9% of time that you're not, microdosing or working with psychedelics or in ceremonies, but getting very conscious with people about, how do we change habits? How do we change mindsets? What's the narratives that we're telling ourselves? How do I strengthen my emotional resilience, my physical resilience, my mental resilience? We are facing so much change. People are overwhelmed. It's like chaotic times. It's confusing. How can we work with the plant medicines to bring more sacredness, more ritual, more presence, more prayer, more intention, more thoughtfulness, more visionary action? And that's really just a snippet of the framework that I'm developing and weaving together, the neuroscience, the science of habit, behavioral psychology, mindset, even, I dare say, touching in the quantum physics realm, although, sticking to the actual science of quantum mechanics without the whole spiritual side of quantum mechanics, but looking at where that bridge is, and so, between science and spirituality. So it's really very multidisciplinary.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And when we're talking about a framework, what we're obviously, or perhaps not so obviously, referencing is the process of integration and the process of preparation, moving into these experiences and then moving out of these experiences. And I know you touched on a lot of things there, and it's so omnidirectional and multidimensional. I'm curious to know, how has your outlook changed when it comes to preparation and integration, say from earlier on when you were starting to walk this path compared to now? Are there any pillars or threads that you can identify there?
I mean, it went from being like nothing to everything. It went from being like, I actually hold the stance that recreational use, when done in a safe environment, can be very helpful as a stepping stone. And so, in my earlier days, there was no preparation. It was the sheer curiosity of like, what is beyond what I'm experiencing with my senses? I've always been just such a curious person in that way, and wanting to push the boundaries of my experience. And now, because, I really dedicate my life to this path. And so my whole life has changed to support a framework that my whole life is built around integration, really, that the work that I'm doing with microdosing is also, for me, I see it as a very powerful integration tool. I don't want to use the word tool. Maybe it's a little bit too, mechanical, but it's an ally to help bring the bigger experiences back into that framework of our everyday lives. And so I'm an advocate for mindfully microdosing. And I think there's a big difference, and I'm not, I have no judgment towards other people who are in, the Silicon Valleys of the world, anyone who wants to be, I think everyone should have the right to alter their consciousness in whatever way they choose. Let's just say that.
Yeah, sovereignty.
So, conscious, deliberate intent of what their choice is for conscious alteration. But for me, what feels the best is, really focusing on the integration, like I said. Giving yourself space. I know so many people who like go to ayahuasca ceremonies and then the next day they're doing stuff, it's like, let that dust settle, rest, and just simple things, super simple things, start eating better, just, I wear an aura ring. So bio-tracking, I'm really into, tracking my sleep. I prioritize my health and my well-being, especially, when we start talking about being a leader, and how do we hold space for all the shit that's being thrown at leaders these days, and anyone who steps out to say anything. It's really volatile out there. And so I see it. And the message I kept getting from the medicine and the different medicine plants that I work with is, strengthen your body. Your body is your vessel for creation. Strengthen your emotional body, really strengthen this vessel so that you can channel more energy through you and hold your center when people are trying to knock you all over the place. So I think there's so many benefits to gain from this kind of approach, no matter who you are and how you're showing up in this world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So perhaps outside of the context of psychedelics and sacred medicines, and still inextricably interwoven into it within our context, we're in the big melting pot at the moment. Timelines are converging. Some people are staying super solid like rocks. Other people are clinging on by the tips of their fingernails. Other people have gone completely bananas and lost their marbles. So, we're in the underworld as a collective. That's my take on what's going on at the moment. So you've mentioned strengthening our emotional body, our emotional center, developing emotional resilience. So how would you suggest, and of course, this is such a multi-dimensional topic as well, but if you were to give a couple of key pointers for how we can strengthen our emotional resilience during these challenging or turbulent times, what would you speak to?
Sleep is a really great place to start. So much comes down to the sleep that we're getting and taking sleep seriously. I'm assuming that you're familiar with Matthew Walker.
No, I'm not familiar with Matthew
He's
Walker.
got great books on sleep. He wrote a really wonderful book that I really recommend everyone check out, although it gave me a little bit of anxiety reading some of his research. I was like, wow, okay, I'm going to skip through that and just get to the good part about what I need to know. So I track my sleep, and filling up your own cup, I think, is so important. Nourishing yourself in these times where things are so confusing and it's so hard to know, it's like entire worldviews are melting right now. One thing I think is also really important is to be aware of the labels that we're giving, the stories that we're weaving about the experience that we're going through, and really being conscious around reframing our narrative, because the narratives that we tell ourselves create our reality. So if we look at it from a certain perspective and we reinforce one narrative, that can lead to, the opposite of emotional resilience. But if we frame it in a way, we can really frame it that supports us. So instead of, being in despair, we can reach for hope and just, remind ourselves that, things happen, and it's not always easy, but we can grow through what we go through. Another way is really understanding the way that our thoughts influence our body. And for those of you who are familiar with Joe Dispenza, he talks a lot about the thinking feeling loop. So that's also really important, that so much of the thoughts and the narratives that we have affect our physiology. So if I'm framing something in a certain way, then I can produce a stress response in my body, or if I frame it a different way, I can produce a parasympathetic response, rest and relax response in my body. So I think becoming just more aware of our physiological reactions to what's going on. And I think that's the basis for so many suggestions. If, you're going through, because really when we're talking about emotional resilience, it's people are dealing with overwhelm, with frustration, with anger. There's so much collective pain going on right now. And so much of that really comes from the story that we're telling ourselves, the story that's on repeat, whether it's intergenerational trauma or, it's how far back do we want to go? And so I have this practice where it's see if you can drop the storyline and just connect with the underlying energy and get really curious about what's going on in your body. Just noticing it, oh, my heart is beating faster right now. I'm starting to sweat. I'm having this physiological reaction. People have these reactions when they see somebody post something on social media that they disagree with. It's just immediate trigger. So paying more attention. And so the emotional resilience is not holding on to it as if it's true. It's creating space there to allow other things to potentially be true, getting curious, what's going on here? Why is my body reacting this way? And then there's the sleep, meditation, walking, fostering mental health in these ways, movement, yoga practice, or whatever kind of movement works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I love to just like blast really loud music and dance, high intensity workouts, and just shaking is another way. Breath work, those are more like practices that we can use, but really tuning in with like what our emotional body is trying to tell us, and stepping outside of the identity of who we think we are and creating more space there, I think are just some great, tips for people to start strengthening more emotional resilience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the underlying threads that I'm picking up here is that it's not a two-dimensional viewpoint. It's not just saying I'm just going to focus on my emotional resilience right now. That's my primary focus, because everything is interwoven. If we want to strengthen or develop, cultivate our emotional resilience, then we've got to work on our physical body. We've got to work on the mental. We've got to work on our spiritual connection. Everything is just so inextricably intertwined, and it's always such a multi-dimensional process that's unfolding in so many different ways. And when I'm thinking about emotional resilience, this is such an important piece for all of us to be developing if we want to be stepping more into our truth. If we want to be clarifying what our truth is, our message, our medicine, our gifts. And when we are stepping into that, we're touching on the territory of what we were speaking to at the start of our conversation before we hit record, which is navigating the pushback, or as I languaged in the very, simple words, how to deal with the haters. And I know that your recent newsletter, which you sent me and which you sent to everyone who is a subscriber, that's on livefreelaurad.com. I think people can sign up there. I'd love to have you share a little bit more with our listeners in regards to this, depending on what you're comfortable speaking to. But as I spoke to, the truth is, the more that we step into our truth, our medicine, our mission, our vision, the more resistance we're going to come across, whether it's the haters or the trolls or people with different perspectives or belief systems or reference points that will try to derail us in one way or another, or try to bring you back down to their level, like tall poppy syndrome, where people want you to do well, but they don't want you to do too well. So it all plays into this mentality of division, which we spoke to. And, ultimately I'd say that, the way that I've been languaging it so far in our conversation, the fire carriers, the change makers, the dream weavers who are calling in a new timeline or these new realities, we want to be moving towards the unification or the shared ground, rather than the divide and the conquer mentality. So as I said, you've had the very recent direct personal experience with that. So I thought it'd be great to hear how you've navigated this and anything you feel called to share about what it was that you've come across.
Yeah, I think I don't want to go down the whole rabbit hole around the topic of cultural appropriation, because it's just so much to speak on. Yeah. I think what feels like the most sort of conducive to this conversation is to encourage people, because really what we're speaking to is this time that we're living in, where everyone feels like it's just like so many people criticizing so many other people right now. And there's always a case that could be made for why someone is doing something wrong and how they could be doing it right. Hashtag do better. It's like, okay, well, so this, in the midst of so much turmoil of this recent experience I had on social media around this topic of cultural appropriation. And I mean, for me, it's like, anyone can make a case for why someone is doing something wrong. And so what I felt like was the most appropriate to share with my list was a little bit about what happened, but more importantly, how do we, what does it take to be a leader in this time to mend the bridge of divide between people? And I think that's really, I can make many cases for, zooming out and having a bigger conversation around cultural appropriation. It's like, the Dalai Lama is practicing traditions from India. The woman that was very upset with me on social media, she is an Ashtanga yoga teacher. And there's, at what point do we want to say, cultural appreciation, cultural preservation, recognizing, and there's also this topic of reciprocity. So I am working with ayahuasca as one of various microdosing plants, and I'm doing it in a way that feels very true for me. And I think it's one thing if I was like ordering supply from Peru and like extracting that from the jungle there, but I'm not, I'm growing it here. I've been working with cultivating these plants. I sing to these plants. I make my own medicine, and I support people who really feel called. And I also have medical practitioners on my team. So we do medical intake and make sure that people are a good fit for working with ayahuasca vine. And most people, the part of the reason that I really felt called to be a little bit more public about working with ayahuasca is because, yes, despite the conversation of cultural appropriation, we're facing a mental health crisis, and more people are committing suicide every single day than ever before. We're seeing a third of the American population is either depressed or anxious. And can plants potentially be a better solution than pills? Yes, we have to talk about sustainability issues, which is why on our land we practice sustainable cultivation. We're replanting. We work with people who have sustainable practices. And yes, the resource of it, I think, is something that we need to be looking at for all resources that we're consuming so extremely, at exponential rates for all resources on the planet right now. So not focusing just myopically on ayahuasca, but zooming out. So I felt called to, even though I've been doing this work with people, and keep in mind that in the US, ayahuasca vine is legal. It's not an illegal substance because it doesn't have the chacruna, the DMT. DMT is a Schedule I drug in the US, unfortunately, same with psilocybin and LSD. But ayahuasca vine, Banisteriopsis caapi, is legal, and it's also a natural antidepressant because it's an MAOI. And I could also go into how that works. But there's also some contraindications, which is why we have medical intake. And I'm tuning in with people to be very clear about whether it feels aligned to work with someone in this way. And, I am feeling hesitant to talk about it openly. I'm sure people are going to be sending me some hate mail around this. I've been receiving hate mail all week for stepping out and talking openly about my experience. And so I'm open to having conversations with it if people want to contact me, but please be kind in your communication around it, because I am coming from a good place. And some people have been really upset with me because they feel that what I'm doing is directly causing harm to Indigenous cultures. And instead of attacking me online, we could have had a conversation. I actually booked a flight to go to see this woman in person. An elder was calling a circle for me to speak with her in person. So that she could put a face on the labels she was giving me. Because when we hurl labels at each other, we dehumanize each other, no matter what color our skin is. And so I'm open to having these conversations and getting into the nitty gritty. And I'm not an expert on the topic of cultural appropriation. But I really reached out and tuned in with like a lot of my teachers and a lot of my elders that I respect over this past week. And it was so incredible to hear the same thing. It's like, these are very divided times, and these are very strong plant medicines, and you have to be really clear in your heart, and be true to your path. And I think that that's so important for all leaders and all people who are stepping out at this time. And, even though I got some people sending me hate mail, I got 50 times more emails, people saying, thank you for doing this work. And I don't take it lightly. I've worked with teachers for many years, and they on social media were demanding that I name my elders online. And I said, no, I would never want to speak their names in social media. They would be so devastated. I would not want to do that. And the criticism was, well, what about reciprocity? And, I've been donating to the GoFundMes of some of the Shipibos I've worked with. And, when I worked with the Shipibos, I worked with the Shipibo grandmother for a month down there, and it was only a short amount of time doing a dieta. And while I was there, it just didn't feel genuine for me to say, oh, I want to do it this way. I want to work and carry this lineage and bring this back. And, that would feel much more inauthentic to me to do it in that way. And I don't think that the jungle medicine and the jungle traditions are for everyone. And so when we start talking about like honoring the lineages, I feel like it's a way of carrying a sense of respect and honor. It's who we are embodied. And so I don't feel like, it feels more like a marketing gimmick for me to say, like exclaim who my elders are and, oh, I just donated this much money to these different people down there. I also just donated money to like my good sister who's evacuating from fires in California. It's not like I see people who are in need and I give when I can give, how much I can. And again, like we were saying at the beginning of this conversation, who's to say what's right or wrong? What if somebody comes into, work with me who has a lot of resources and, people don't know that I've been working on project incubators and the direction that I'm going with the people that I'm working with. It's all about finding solutions to the challenges that we face. So, someone could be like, shame on you, which, what? Shame is the toxicity of our time. That's not helping anything. Or we could say, who knows if this is good or bad? Maybe what could come out of that is that somebody with a lot of resources is going to be impacted by this and think outside the box and come up with novel solutions. And we come up with innovative programs or solutions that help solve the inequality gap or that help bring more funding to Indigenous cultures. And then it's like the question of like honoring all Indigenous cultures and all people of, the whole planet. And again, the cultural appropriation conversation is so sticky. It's so hard because it's like, yes, the European colonization was the most recent one, but there's been lots of colonization that's happened amongst different cultures for millennia. Yuval Noah Harari speaks about this too. And I can't own what my ancestors did, and I can only show up in a way that honors life, that honors people, that honors equality. And I'm really dedicated to want to find solutions to the challenges that we face. And so, yeah, I'm in deep inquiry about all of it right now, about how to move in a good way. And what also seems true for me is to not be posting about microdosing ayahuasca online. That is one thing that feels really clear for me, because I think there's a case that can be made around education, but I also think it's a perception thing, and people, from the face of it think, okay, well, anyone can do it. So let's just, start microdosing ayahuasca. And I think that the conversation needs to be held in a very specific way to protect people's safety and the honoring of the traditions from which this medicine has come. And yeah, there's so many ways that we could look at it,
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, it's a sticky point of conversation, and there are so many nuances in all the things that we're talking about. And it's so easy for someone on the outside to be looking in and criticizing, not taking into account all of these nuances and the subtleties and the complexities. And that, I guess that is one of the ways for navigating the pushback and how we can, in the language you use, do better. I haven't seen the hashtag do better, but I get the sense that it's a big thing within our kind of cultural landscape at the moment.
Well, so this is some of the ways that I would recommend that we could all collectively do better. Let me just like run through a few. Okay. And I outlined this in my last email. Like number one, create space for other people to have a belief that doesn't match up with your belief without having to try to spend all of your time enraged convincing them. These people who I so get their concerns around cultural appropriation, for example, and sustainability. And I still am able to have my own beliefs about what I feel is true. And it's no different in my perspective than believing that you need to believe in this God or that God. So just even creating space that so many of the stories that we tell ourselves are beliefs, and that we don't need to necessarily try to convert other people to our beliefs. And I think that that's a great place to start. To zoom out and to take a bigger picture perspective, that there's so much nuance in every conversation. And like we said, you cannot look at it you can't portray every side of the conversation on social media. So it's easy to jump to conclusions. It's easy to label people. It's easy to judge people. And especially when people are confused and angry and hurt. And I am not condoning, the mistreatment of Indigenous people or, any people. It's easy to label people and then construe storylines that simply aren't true. So, being willing to listen and get curious, trying to disprove yourself first. That's a big process I've been in this past week of like, where am I wrong? What's mine? What's not mine in this conversation? I like that idea of like, okay, where are the gaps? What am I missing here? Also walking away from the fight. My mom says this. She's like, I don't argue with people. As soon as we start arguing, we're in that attack and defend mentality. I am so available to have conversations with people who want to come and sit down and talk in peace and kindness, but I don't want to argue, and, like I said, shaming people, I think, is the real toxicity of our time. The call out cancel culture. I think that there's a better way. I think not reacting from a triggered place, staying calm. So if you're feeling triggered by something, pause, be open to holding your own beliefs lightly and altering your own perception. I think it's also so crucial for people to just even know the way their neuroscience works in terms of, we like to fit what we believe to be true. So we search for out there to prove ourselves right all the time. We have a belief system. It's like a box that we live within. And then we try to prove it right. We try to fit what we see into our pre-existing box, which of course the irony is that plant medicines and psychedelics help us to think outside the box. And so for, people who are, just in the fundamental beliefs of all sorts of isms, like holding it lightly, being willing to see things from a different perspective, being willing to hold space for other people to believe something different, and know that it's much more nuanced, even when it comes to this conversation of like, oh, well, what if we just all agree that we don't harm other people? Well, it's like when you start getting into the nitty gritty of defined by who, should we be in the Buddhist tradition with a broom sweeping our feet in front of us so that we're not, squishing any insects in front of us? Some people think that the work I'm doing is harming Indigenous cultures. I'm not quite there with how I feel about that. So defining anything, it's like we hear people online saying, well, we need to hold people accountable, but accountable according to who? Accountable according to your belief system? And I think what's really interesting is that we're all struggling in the same way, where we're navigating a very broken system, where the foundation of how we're all operating is based on competition and separation and greed. And so everything that boils up, the conversation that I'm also very concerned about, Indigenous cultures and equality, it's all rising from a very unequal system that it's built on. And so those are like symptoms that are arising. It's like having a skin disorder, and on the surface of the skin we see, oh, that boil is boiling up, and oh, look how gross that is, shame on you. But actually it's an underlying cause. And so that's what I'm really interested in, is like, what are we all trying to work towards here? How can we all live more harmoniously on this planet? The real issues are like, well, not the real issues. I don't want to say that. Some other issues that we're really facing is, how do humans live peacefully and harmoniously on this planet when, in the midst of a real environmental crisis? And so these are not easy answers. Do we let the system collapse? Do we evolve the system? But just reminding people that so much of the conversations of back and forth, black and white thinking, right, wrong, left, right, you're for the movement, you're against the movement, these are all symptoms of a much bigger underlying dysfunction and dis-ease. And so I'm just trying to live my life in a way that feels connected to the earth, that feels true to my heart. And some people are going to resonate with that, and some people aren't. And I have to be okay with that path. And it's the warrior path, the heart warriors. It is not an easy path, and it is especially not easy today. And I think that's what true leadership is truly being able to respond to the things that you're seeing that you disagree with in a way that actually sets an example, a template for how to hold conversations that are taboo topics, that are controversial topics that people disagree on. People have been disagreeing about things for millennia. I just interviewed a Navajo elder who called in both of her lineages. And I said, what were some of the similarities and differences of these lineages? And she said, they really didn't like each other, and it's like, right. Even indigenous cultures have been warring. White people have been suppressing other white people, and I know saying this, some people are going to say, well, this is white privilege. And, some people might say, well, now she's showing white fragility. And it's like, wow, these are dehumanizing labels. And we need to be so careful with how we throw this out and how we throw those labels around. And I'm willing to have conversations who are willing to actually have conversations that are civil, that are kind, that are considerate, that have, the capacity to listen and to speak, and to be thoughtful. I had one hate email come at me this week who said, you effing capitalist, you are capitalizing off of medicines. Why don't you go get a real job? And I was like, wow, you just contradicted yourself. In like, come with like thoughtful, as soon as people hurl hate, it's hard to listen, and so come in kindness. Let's mend these bridges. Let's mend these divides. And this is not my area of expertise. So I know that I'm going to get a wave of people even reaching out to me who are going to have all sorts of opinions about what I'm saying. I just want to live my life in a good way, honor the earth, honor the people that I love, honor the people who have walked this planet before me, give thanks to the plants and what they have taught me, eat food from my garden, tend to my chickens, swim in an ocean, and work with people who want to keep our air clean and want to keep our oceans clean and want to find solutions to the inequality challenges that we live in, to build new systems that fundamentally support humanity in a different way, rather than on this story of separation. Like, can we start talking about the story of togetherness, of unity? Can we start dancing more, singing together, playing together, more intimacy in the way that we live our lives? There's so much to share about it.
Ooh, yeah, that was great. Oh, there were so many threads that I would love to follow. It's like every time you're saying something, I'm like, yes, that's truth for me as well. And the warrior's path, and something that you've clearly illuminated through all of this is the ability to ask questions and to ask better questions. And there's a proverb, I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but it goes something like, instead of seeking to be right, what if we could seek the right answers? And of course, then we come into the conversation about right and wrong, but it's even that question, it's allowing us to open our perspectives to see how many different perspectives there are and the nuances and the complexities. And one of the questions that immediately came to mind when you said, this is the warrior's path, the question is, what would love choose in this moment? And it's about coming back to the heart, coming back to love and choosing love. And if only we could just take that pause, take a breather, and instead of coming from a place of reactivity, we're responding and saying, what would love choose in this moment? How can I be, instead of going down that path of division, how can I bridge the gap and come to a place of unification?
I have this practice, I call them higher reaching questions. And the mind has this way, when you ask a question, the mind subconsciously goes to work to try to find the answer. And so, what is possible here? So when I'm in these really tough situations or I'm not seeing the whole picture, asking these questions, what are my blind spots? What am I not seeing? How could I do better? How could we do better? What is really possible? I always like this word possibility, because then it keeps it open-ended. Like, what else is possible here? How can we come together in a more harmonious way? And so these higher reaching questions, as Einstein said, we can't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that we created it. So how do we reach? How do we think bigger? How do we reach for solutions? Maybe there are solutions that are facing us. that we just can't see yet. Maybe plant medicines will help us shift our perspective, our perception of reality, so that all of a sudden, where we previously saw lack and limitation, we can now perceive possibility and solutions. And maybe there are solutions towards helping lay the foundation for true equality. Maybe that's not a monetary system. Maybe we can find new system, more localized systems. I'm open to those possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And to touch on something that you said before, you've said it a couple of times now that you're not an expert at these things, but I would perhaps reframe. And, we've talked about reframes essentially throughout this conversation. The reframe there for me is that, yes, we may not be experts at any one particular topic, but the more of this work that we continue to do to become more integrated holistically on physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, then the thing that we are experts at is ourselves. We're expert at doing us from a place that is connected, that is integrated with mind, body, and soul, and is coming from a place of open heart, clear heart, and connected to the land and feeling into the most harmonious way. Yeah, that resonates for us.
And I also just want to add to that I don't feel right in anything that I'm saying. I don't feel like I'm holding it and being like, because cultural appropriation is real, inequality is real, racial discrimination is real, totally. So it's not to say that these things aren't real and that I'm saying they're not, or that, I'm trying to be right in any of this. I'm just trying to figure it out too. I'm just also trying to navigate amongst so much chaos and so much like confusion in the world right now. And I'm just trying to also live in a way that is, in alignment with my heart path and what feels good, connecting with people, like I said, tending to my garden. And so, yeah, I just wanted to really say that, like, I don't feel like I'm right or trying to defend anything. I'm just, what I wrote in that email the other day about like thinking bigger, trying to disprove yourself first. I really just wrote that as what my process was in this, oh, should I react with defense and prove you to believe my beliefs? And it's like, okay, I'm actually not trying to prove anything here. I'm just trying to have a conversation. And maybe there's going to be something that I'm going to learn, and someone can approach me after this conversation and said, I heard you say this and it really rubbed me the wrong way. And I would so invite you to look at it this way. Maybe let's have a conversation about it. I really welcome that kind of dialogue, because I know that there's a lot of things that I don't see, based on my upbringing, based on the culture, even though I like to say that I was a minority growing up, I was English growing up in a French city, and I grew up in also a cultural soup. And so, but there's things that we all miss and don't see. And so I think it's really about holding this place of like, I'm not right about anything. And can we actually just move past right and wrong altogether? Can we just move into a different languaging around it and find harmony first and foremost in our own bodies, centeredness, groundedness, a sense of connectedness to the earth, because that to me is what's real. My relationship with the plants, that to me is what's real. My relationship to my husband, that's what's real, to my animals on our land and to the ocean. And can we please keep our oceans clean, most importantly for all humanity? And that it's like, where do we want the conversation to go ultimately in our everyday lives? Do we want to stay fighting each other? And social media, in my opinion, is being used as a way to keep people divided. And I've been in inquiry around actually stepping off social media. I'm not quite there, but I'm definitely contemplating it. I'm really questioning the service of it, and what I'm contributing in that way. And so, yeah, I think inviting everyone to be in such a place of inquiry around what's true with a capital T, truth, like what's true for you,
yeah, you've offered such good medicine around this notion of self-inquiry. And, like we've spoken to, just to rehash, reiterate, to come to some sort of summary or conclusion, there are so many buzzwords and buzz themes and so many bandwagons to jump on these days that another proverb that comes to mind is seek first to understand before being understood.
Mm.
Just these simple little things that if we turn the lens of awareness back inside ourselves and go, yeah, I don't have the bigger picture for pretty much anything at all. Where are the places that I'm not understanding, and where can I better understand rather than being on the front foot of attacking and trying to prove that I'm right and someone else is wrong?
Well, it's like such deep medicine for our time.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, I think this is a good place to wind things down. It's been full power. Yeah.
Whew, I know.
Look, well, as we wrap things up then, I mentioned your website, Live Free Laura D, and that's also your Instagram handle as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I just want to pass it over to you as an opportunity to speak to anything that you have coming up, or anything that you want to, or anywhere you want to direct people, keeping in mind all of this will be in the show notes as well.
Thank you. I put so much love into my email newsletter that goes out, and it's exclusive content. I don't post that on my website. And it's something that I am really put a lot of time into, because I really share from my heart. And so I encourage people, if you're resonating with conversation, I don't stick within like a certain box. I really share about like what's the medicine for me in this time, and sharing that with people for whoever resonates. I also have a 6-week introduction to microdosing course coming up, starting pretty soon. So I don't know when this is going to be released, but maybe people want to check that out, and I can send you a link for my website. And and I'm taking a little break from working with retreats and leading retreats, and going back to school. But keep in touch, and I do online programs. I also do one-on-one coaching with people, and I will be starting retreats again in probably 2 years from now. It's a long way off, but and if you just want to connect, and if there's anything that either triggered you in a unpleasant way in this conversation, or in a positive way, or if there's any seeds that got planted and you want to reach out and have a conversation with me, encourage me to see a different perspective, I welcome, again, all conversations, as long as they come from a place of kindness. Otherwise, I'm not interested in engaging.
Hear, hear. Well said. Well, Laura D, it's been a pleasure to have this conversation and to tune in this way. I would love to offer one final invitation while we're still recording, and that is that just as we opened up our space with the invitation to speak to your relationship to honoring the sacred, remembering the sacred ways, this is another invitation here as we close up our virtual container to leave the listeners with some closing remarks, or to honor anything else that comes to mind, whether through prayer, spoken word, anything that feels resonant for you right now.
I really just to hold this heartfelt prayer that we in our lifetime can come to a moment where humans look at all other humans as sacred and equal, and that we really feel the need to take care of our earth, and that we really feel the need to take action to keep our oceans clean and our lands clean, and encourage people to think outside the box and to see all places as sacred, not just the sacred sites of the world, but all places as sacred and special and worth preserving. And that's just my prayer, that we can really up level the way that we're all choosing to show up on this planet right now. So thank you for that.
Beautiful words, and aho to that. I'm going to be cutting it off here.
Okay.
I love your passion. Yeah. Yeah, you had some good ones there where you were just really going for it. It was great. Yeah.
It's so funny because yesterday I was talking to my friend Henry, and I was like, I'm just not willing to be a martyr for this conversation, and he was like, you need to be out there talking about this. And I was like, creativity and psychedelics. Like, I just want to talk about creativity and psychedelics. And then I left him a message this morning, and I was like, I'm going to be interviewed on a podcast, and I know it's going to be all over this. And it's true. It's like, Yeah, and I also want to be careful about calling people out who are calling me out, because I want to have respect for
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
You know, when I've talked to elders about like and seeking guidance around, the work that I'm doing, even this Navajo elder, and she was like, "Well, why don't you have an indigenous elder oversee your practice?" And I was like, "Well, it just I don't know. I feel like it just doesn't feel genuinely authentic for me to be like, oh, I have this. This is like, he's like this like figurehead, or this woman. It's just like, it just doesn't feel true to me. Or maybe I just haven't met the teacher.
Hmm.
But I have had teachers that said, your primary teacher is ayahuasca. And so really listen to that plant.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I think that's a big piece of the puzzle as well. We're coming at it largely a lot of the time through this very egocentric, anthropocentric worldview, rather than
Mm-hmm.
taking a look at the larger animistic landscape that we're just a tiny little part of. It's like the plants have sentience, the plants have intelligence, so does Earth,
Yeah.
Gaia, as a whole self-creative, like self-organizing system.
I really actually wanted to say that, and I forgot to say that because I think, one thing that I've heard so many indigenous elders say is that these plants belong to all people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know, maybe you want to keep it recording this long and just allow it to go.
Mm.
But, I have heard that from a lot of people. And I have sat in ceremonies with teachers who I respect, who really very clearly said to me, ayahuasca is your teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and listen to what the plant has to say to you. And I've had other elders who say, this plant belongs to humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And one time I had a journey, a solo journey. I've been cultivating my own practice, sitting solo with the plants for a long time. And I had this one journey where I went into this vision and I saw this small group of shamans from a different time. It was like multi-dimensional different time. And they were coming together because it was like they were foreseeing this time now, and that they were praying for ayahuasca to move throughout the world. And we need more people to be carrying this medicine. And of course, we need to do it in a good way,
Mm-hmm.
with respect, and not just taking from these cultures and giving back, but not because of cultural reciprocity per se, but because we fundamentally want humanity to be equal. We want all people to be free,
Mm-hmm.
not from this place of guilt, is what I'm saying. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I need to give back to them. It's like, no, from like really truly freaking wanting humanity to be equal on this planet and working towards that vision.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if more people worked with plant medicines, more people would share that vision and more resources would flow in that way. And maybe we can flip the whole conversation on its head by saying, let's frame the conversation around cultural appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
What would that
Mm-hmm.
look like? What solutions could come out from that conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I know a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
think what I'm doing is wrong. Well, some people, I think more people feel like what I'm doing is right. I've gotten so many responses to my email that went out yesterday who are just like, do you, just do you.
Mm. Yeah, that's actually quite surprising to me that you have received so much backlash. I didn't know there were that many people who would carry that much energy towards sending hate your way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's been there was like one woman and she shot a video about it, and again it was just very one-sided, of course, very narrow perspective, and then just a whole bunch of people jumped on that bandwagon, and then
Sure.
some people just came over to my feed and also to through like my website sending me emails, and
Mm-hmm.
and I have really thought a lot about what some people are saying, and yeah, there are places that I have adjusted. For example, I don't feel like posting online is appropriate
Mm-hmm.
around that medicine because it's needs to be held, I feel like, in a bit of a different way. And that's just my own truth. If other people want to post about it, that's their truth.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm around, especially like the offerings, that feels very clear. And then another really strong thing that came clear was not to use any Shipibo graphics on. I have to change some. I've been using some on my website because I appreciate that the visions that I get are patterns that are from those traditions, and I appreciate that. And so from my perspective, it's this like cultural appreciation, but I can see how it's perceived, and I don't want to be disrespectful. And I think that that's really important as well. And so there have been things where people are like, you need to do better. And I'm like, okay, like, how can I do better? Where are the places that are my blind spots that I'm missing right now, and that I need to walk with more public respect because, okay, they don't know me. They don't know that I'm working on projects to help support Indigenous cultures. They don't know that I am funding and sending money to help support some of the devastation that's been happening in Peru. But I don't feel like I need to tell people that because that feels like a weird marketing gimmick. And so I just have to keep being true to asking myself, how do I do better because I want to do better, because that's how I want to be on this planet. So, and I believe that these plants are for all of humanity. And I'm so grateful for many, many of the countless Indigenous traditions that have paved this path and have made my life easier because of the work that they've done over thousands of years. And so I fully bow in respect to that. And I don't know if you want to include this little post-production, but that feels like such a good way for me to end, is by saying, I respect and honor those traditions. And I am grateful for the work that they've done. And I have the hair standing up on my skin. And as I say that, and thank you for the songs, that I hear in the ethers, and the insights and the visions that I've received, the healing that I've received from these Indigenous cultures. And yet I want to walk on this earth in a way that feels genuine and true to me and my culture and the lineage that I'm carrying for myself.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I will add that in, all of this in. And I share similar sentiments. And that's one thing that I'm learning, that I'm appreciative of you, and your message is the very message that you're sharing. So thank you for giving a voice to all of this.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on. It just feels like, hot topics. You got to be willing to sit in the fire.
Totally. Yeah, I can feel the heat for sure.